What's up everybody on YouTube? AJ Rest back to discuss another video, and today we're going to be talking about the biggest takeaways from NFL Week 3. Week 3, it's still early guys. We got to chill on putting people in the Super Bowl, in the MVP conversation, things of that nature, but some teams look really good. I mean, the Vikings, they blew out the Texans. That offense is looking great with Sam Darnold under Kevin O'Connell playing really efficient football, and Brian Flores, that defense is stifling and putting quarterbacks in blenders. We surprisingly saw that from CJ Stroud. Another team that's playing really good football unexpectedly with the absence of Jordan Love, Malik Willis and the Green Bay Packers is getting another dub. They look really good. The Seattle Seahawks, they're still undefeated too under rookie head coach Mike McDonald. Chiefs are still undefeated. There's a lot of teams playing nice, and even a team like the Carolina Panthers under the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton with the mention of Bryce Young, they got their first win. That's insane. We also see some teams that continue to struggle, like the Dallas Cowboys run defense, playing awful football. They were down as much as 28-6 against the Baltimore Ravens. Just looking bad, not gonna lie. And the Ravens finally got their first win, so that's a good thing for them. They showed shades of resemblance of how they played in the 2023 season, but also their defense looked skeptical at the end of the game like they did against the Raiders. So there's just a lot of different storylines to talk about. We also had a doubleheader in a Monday night matchup between the Bills and the Jaguars, and also the Commanders and the Cincinnati Bengals. And we saw the New York Jets on Thursday Night Football, and Aaron Rodgers played some good football, so that was an encouraging sign for them. There was a lot of intriguing storylines from NFL Week 3 in the games that took place. So before we recap these NFL Week 3 games, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. You know we post about here videos about the NBA, NFL, Marvel, DC, pop culture, cooking videos, shorts, things of that nature. With that being said, let's talk about NFL Week 3. We of course have to talk about the first game that took place between the New York Jets and the New England Patriots, and it was definitely a blowout. The Jets won 24-3, and a lot of people had confidence in the Patriots to potentially upset the Jets because how they played in the first two games, how they upset the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 1, in Week 2, how they took the now undefeated Seattle Seahawks to overtime and almost won that. So those were some good signs for the Patriots, and they have a solid defense, but reality came in and the Jets finally woke up, specifically on defense. They struggled a little against the 49ers. Titans game was a little bit better, but in this game they definitely showed a lot, only allowing a field goal for the whole game. And offensively, they were clicking on all cylinders. Aaron Rodgers had a really good game, completed 27 out of his 35 passing attempts, had 281 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, had his first official win at MetLife Stadium. I'm not counting the game that took place last year, so yeah, but the Jets, they look really good. And also we have to talk about their young rushing attack too. Obviously they had Breece Hall, but also Braylon Allen. I mean, on the ground he had 55 rushing yards and had a few receptions as well. I mean, he's a really good back, only 20 years old. Breece Hall also had 54 yards too. And also, I'm sure y'all saw the crazy stat though about Aaron Rodgers throwing his first touchdown to a first round wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson only had 33 receiving yards, but he didn't have to do too much because, like I said, the Jets dominated this game in all fashions of the football. Allen Lazard also had a touchdown too. Just a really overall solid game for the Jets, and they're looking good right now. At first glance, I'm not gonna lie, this game was kind of surprising in the result because the Giants were able to defeat the Cleveland Browns 21-15, but how the Browns looked after Week 1, and I know they won Week 2 against Jacksonville, I'm just not surprised that they lost this game. Talking about the Giants first, Daniel Jones had a really good game. I mean, he completed 24 out of his 34 passing attempts, had 236 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Especially against that Browns defense, that's really impressive. So that's good for the New York Giants for sure. Devin Singletary also had 16 carries for 65 rushing yards and a touchdown. But really, the main person I want to talk about on the Giants, easily their best offensive weapon, is Malik Neighbors. Had 8 receptions for 78 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he's definitely a playmaker, and he's gonna make plays. I know not necessarily before the draft it seemed like he might not have wanted to go there, but obviously for the Giants, you needed that for Daniel Jones, and you now have a 1-2 record. I still wouldn't overreact. I don't think they're that great of a team, but it's a good win for them. They do play on Thursday Night Football against the Cowboys, so this could be some momentum for them, potentially knowing that Malik Neighbors is easily the focal point of their offense and they need to target him as much as possible, but also not being predictable. But that's really good for them in terms of how they played offensively and defensively too, because like I said, Cleveland only scored 15 points. And for the Browns though, Deshaun Watson, I mean, he didn't have a terrible game, I would say, just not the most efficient. Completed 21 out of 37 passing attempts, had 196 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Their rushing game though was not good at all. He only had a total of 59 rushing yards. Amari Cooper did have a better game though. In the first 2 games, he wasn't really a focal point, which is crazy because he's easily their #1 wide receiver, but he had 7 receptions for 86 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. But for the Browns, man, I don't know. Guys, it's really going to be interesting to see how this thing goes because their defense is good. I know Myles Garrett was dealing with a lingering foot issue, so that's also a tough thing there. But this is definitely a year for Deshaun Watson that is make or break. Until the fourth quarter started, this game was a doozy. Of course, I'm talking about the game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New Orleans Saints, where the Eagles won 15-12, but it was 3-0 until the fourth quarter. Both defenses were playing really well, but when Saquon Barkley broke for that 65-yard rushing touchdown, that's when I knew things were going to get popping, and he played a really great game. Had 17 carries for 147 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And also Dallas Goedert for the Philadelphia Eagles, their tight end, he went off, had 10 receptions for 170 receiving yards. No touchdowns, but he had a mesh route at the end of the game that really just sealed it all, had a big gain, and that was really good for the Eagles. I mean, mean, that was a good win because a lot of people picked the Saints to win, especially how they played after their first 2 weeks. But that's why it's important in my opinion. Like I said last week, it's still so early in the season. It's so unpredictable. We don't necessarily know how teams are going to be off later in the year. You can't start putting people into best team in the league yet or Super Bowl contenders yet until it's almost week 10 or something like that, like I continually say. And for the Saints, I mean, they definitely have a really good roster and they have the potential to be a playoff team. If they don't win their division, they can still be a wild card team, but we just have to pump the brakes on overreacting to everything, putting people in MVP conversations. Because of course we know how Derek Carr played against the Cowboys and the Panthers in week 1, but in this game didn't really have a good game. Completed 14 out of his 25 attempts, had 142 passing yards, a touchdown, and interception. Their offense just really wasn't clicking. I will say Chris Olave had a solid game, had 6 receptions for 86 receiving yards and a touchdown. But we know the Saints, we do know that the Saints, they have a really great defense with Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, among other pieces. So I definitely won't overreact to this loss for them. But for the Eagles, I mean, they really needed this win, especially after they collapsed against the Falcons on Monday Night Football in week 2. This game wasn't close from the jump. The Minnesota Vikings blew out the Houston Texans, winning 34-7. And in the first quarter, when CJ Stroud threw their interception, you kind of knew what was on the table. The Vikings just played great defense. Brian Flores is proven to be one of the best, if not the best, defensive coordinators in the league for sure. Like Brock Purdy said in week 2, his scheme is crazy. That defense is able to disguise in different coverages and really just go to town on quarterbacks, making them perplexed. And that's really good when you're trying to be a playoff team in the NFC and in the NFC North. And the Vikings are 3-0 right now. They look great. Sam Darnold is playing really good football still. Completed 17 out of his 28 passing attempts, had 181 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Aaron Jones on the ground absolutely bludgeoned the Houston Texans, had 19 carries for 102 rushing yards. He also had 46 receiving yards and a touchdown as well and 5 receptions. And then Justin Jefferson, he had 6 receptions for 81 receiving yards and a touchdown. This team looks really nice so far in the NFC North. Of course, it's early, like I say, but they are number 1 in the NFC North right now. It's really a testament to how well coached that the Vikings are from their offense and defensively. I mentioned Brian Flores as DC, but also their head coach, Kevin O'Connell. He is an intelligent football mind, came from the Los Angeles Rams a few seasons ago. You just love to see the culture that they're building there. A lot of people thought that they were going to be trashed this year because Kirk Cousins leaving, bringing in Sam Darnold, bringing in JJ McCarthy, who's out for the season, of course, with that meniscus injury. But this team looks very poised, and it seems like Sam Darnold's very sure of himself now. That has been the problem with him in the past, being on the Jets, being on the Panthers. I think that he really learned a lot in San Francisco, and his team is really thriving. And for the Houston Texans, you're going to have games like this sometimes. It probably humbled them in a sense because a lot of people are putting them in the AFC Championship game, saying they're one of the best teams in the league, and there's still some stages of growth that you have to go through. Of course, Joe Mixon was out because of that ankle injury he sustained against the Chicago Bears in week 2, but this team, they're going to be fine. I mean, this is the worst game of CJ Stroud's career, I would say. Had 2 interceptions, but he did complete 20 out of his 31 passing attempts, had 215 passing yards and a touchdown. But really for the Texans, what it came down to, they were making plays, but it was the freaking penalties. Laremy Tunsil, he's one of the best offensive linemen in the league at that left tackle position, but bro, that was awful. All the illegal formations, the holdings, it was very bad. And it's hard to watch football like that when you're getting penalized so much. So that was a bad loss for the Texans, but they still should be encouraged because this can humble them and they can learn from a loss. Every loss is a lesson, you can say that in a sense. But for the Vikings, they look hot right now and they're playing really good football. Here's another surprising blowout that took place. The Denver Broncos beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 26-7. Bo Nix finally got his first win as an NFL quarterback and played a really good game, I would say. Completed 25 out of his 36 passing attempts, had 216 passing yards, also had 47 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown too. So he looked really good out the pocket, getting his teammates involved. Cortland Sutton had 7 receptions for 68 receiving yards. Not too many offensive weapons having crazy games besides Bo Nix. Jaleel McLaughlin had a rushing touchdown, but I will say the Denver Broncos defense, they're playing really good. Of course, they had Pat Surtain, one of the best cornerbacks in the league, but overall as a unit, they were able to have their way against Tampa Bay. For the Buccaneers, you don't push the panic button. Like I said about the Texans, sometimes you just need games like this to remain humble. Baker Mayfield didn't have the greatest game. I mean, he was efficient in terms of his completion to attempts ratio, completing 25 out of his 33 passing attempts, but he only had 163 passing yards, a touchdown, and interception. Not a great game or performance from the Buccaneers. Chris Godwin had a touchdown on 53 receiving yards, but Mike Evans, he wasn't utilized a lot at all. Only had 2 receptions on 17 receiving yards. You definitely got to get one of the best receivers in the game and a future Hall of Famer involved more than that. But for the Buccaneers, like I said, it's not the panic button for them. It isn't the greatest loss, but you have to remain humble, and sometimes you need some games like this to keep you right and knowing that it's a week-to-week league. And for the Broncos, they were finally able to get their first win. That's a good thing for them. They're really a team that I don't expect too much from, but they can be competitive because they do have Sean Payton. And while I don't necessarily agree with how he did Russell Wilson in terms of the disrespect, I do acknowledge that he is a Super Bowl winning coach and a solid offensive mind. So I will say that. So that's a good win for Denver. You mentioned
how we don't get it.
Whatever, keep going, keep firing away. They told me this city was going to burn if we came in here and won the game, so I guess it is.
The Green Bay Packers beat the Tennessee Titans 30-14, and you have to give props to not only Matt LaFleur, but also Malik Willis. Playing against his former team in Tennessee, he acknowledged that he was grateful for the organization, but of course you want to beat your former team that did trade you, and he's played great in these past 2 weeks. In the absence of Jordan Love, a lot of people thought after that week 1 game when he got hurt that the Green Bay Packers season could be in limbo, because when you lose your franchise quarterback, you don't know what to expect from your backup, especially Malik Willis. But you can tell that he has improved as a backup in Tennessee and then getting traded to Green Bay, being able to learn this system, and Matt LaFleur has put him in a lot of positions to be successful. He doesn't have to do too much, but he did complete 13 out of his 19 passing attempts, had 202 passing yards and a touchdown, and also on the running game he played really well too, had 6 carries for 73 rushing yards and a touchdown. I mean, I just like how Malik Willis is thriving with Green Bay, and really I think this is also an audition for potentially other teams too for Malik, because he's showing that he's a competent quarterback. You can say it's also the system with LaFleur, but you can tell that he's improved and learned a lot. Rushing wise, besides Malik Willis, Emmanuel Wilson and Josh Jacobs contributed, having a total of 93 rushing yards between the two, and also Jaden Reed had 19 rushing yards. Christian Watson had 67 receiving yards, Jaden Reed had 50 receiving yards, and Emmanuel Wilson had a receiving touchdown. So Packers, they look really good. Certainly I'm expecting to be one of the best teams in the NFC. Talked about the Vikings in the NFC North earlier. They're number 1 right now, but when Jordan Love comes back, I think that the Green Bay Packers will ascend to that number 1 position potentially, but you also have to account for the Detroit Lions too, so that division is definitely an interesting one. It will be compelling to see how it fluctuates throughout the season. And for the Tennessee Titans, man, Will Levis does it again. Had a meme in week 1, week 2, and week 3 throwing the pick 6. Man, it's just tough. I don't know, because also Will Levis wasn't a first round quarterback too, so in principle you could potentially move on after this year and look for another quarterback next year or in the draft too, because you can tell that Brian Callahan is frustrated with bro. I mean, there's no other way to slice it. I mean, yeah, the stats look good. He completed 26 out of his 34 passing attempts, had 260 passing yards. Yeah, he had 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions. I mean, he continues to find ways to turn over the ball, and yes, he has a lot of talent, but it's like he tries to do too much at times, and it's really just a discouraging thing if you are a Tennessee Titans fan. DeAndre Hopkins had 73 receiving yards and a touchdown, but like I said, for the Titans, I mean, just don't expect a lot out of them. They are still winless. They're 0-3 now, so man, that's tough for them. But for the Green Bay Packers, like I said, it was a really good dub. The Indianapolis Colts were finally able to get their first win over the Chicago Bears, winning 21-16. And for the Bears, I'll talk about them first real quick. Caleb Williams had his best game of his career so far, I guess. It's crazy though. They had him throw the ball 52 times. He completed 33 of those passes, having 363 passing yards, which is impressive, but he also had 2 interceptions and 2 touchdowns. At least he finally got his first touchdown, which was to Rome Odunze. So who should get the ball? Personally, I think it's Rome Odunze because he caught it, but that's just my perspective. Obviously, Caleb Williams was the number 1 pick, but that's besides the point. For the Bears, I don't know. I mean, they definitely have a really good defense, but offensively, it's going to take some stages, of course, when you have a rookie quarterback. They do have weapons still, but a lot of people, and myself, I'm guilty of this, imagined a reality where they could be a wild card team in the NFC, and only time will tell because it is still early. But with how the Vikings are playing, with how the Packers and of course the Lions are playing too, I don't see the Bears having a chance to make the playoffs at all. You can make the case that potentially the NFC North will have 3 teams in the playoffs, being one of those teams in the Vikings, Lions, or Packers winning division, and the other 2 being wild card teams. So only time will tell with that. I don't know, but I mentioned Rome Odunze earlier. Of course, he got his first receiving touchdown, but he also had a really good game. Had 6 receptions for 112 receiving yards. Cole Kmet also had a really good game, 10 receptions on 97 receiving yards and a touchdown as well too. And then DJ Moore had 8 receptions for 78 receiving yards. So they definitely could have won this game. Like I said, they nearly lost by 5 points, but it's going to take some time for Caleb Williams and for the offense to thrive overall and get things going. But for the Colts, they definitely needed this win. Anthony Richardson has definitely been up and down in the first 2 weeks, and in this game included. He only threw the ball 20 times, completed 10 out of his 20 passing attempts, had 167 passing yards and 2 interceptions, and he threw a bad interception in the red zone when they were about to score a touchdown. That was tough, but their running game is great. Of course, having Jonathan Taylor, one of the best running backs in the league, 23 carries on 110 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. I think he really made a huge difference, and the Colts defense was able to step up in moments too. The real question for me about the Colts in the receiving game is Michael Pittman Jr. He really hasn't had the greatest start so far this season. I don't know what it is. Alec Pierce has really been the number 1 wide receiver for them in the first few weeks, but I'm sure they'll be able to get Pittman going, but it's a good win for the Colts. Before I say anything else about this game, Russell Wilson, you are not starting this season. At least he shouldn't, in my opinion. The Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Los Angeles Chargers 20-10 on Sunday, and they need to keep Justin Fields in, period. I know it's not necessarily the most explosive offense. He isn't throwing for 400 yards every game, but when you're playing great football like this, and the Steelers have the defense that they have, you want to keep this engine going. And I will say, this game against the Chargers was easily Justin Fields' best game of the season. He completed 25 out of his 32 passing attempts, had 245 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I mean, the team was clicking. Obviously, obviously defensively, but offensively too. Najee Harris has 70 rushing yards. Justin Fields also had a rushing touchdown too in himself, so technically he had 2 total touchdowns. Calvin Austin III had 4 receptions on 95 receiving yards and a touchdown. George Pickens had 57 receiving yards. The team looked nice, and I like how they're playing. They're undefeated now, 3-0 in the AFC North, continuing to lead that division so far. For the Los Angeles Chargers, I'm not necessarily surprised at how things went for them. Justin Herbert was dealing with an ankle injury going into this game. We even saw Taylor Heineke play some too because of that ankle injury. The biggest thing with the Chargers, I just pray that Justin Herbert can be healthy this season because they definitely have a chance, especially under Harbaugh, this physical running game that they're playing. J.K. Dobbins had a great first 2 games, but of course when you play against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, they're going to put you in check, and he only had 44 rushing yards. The big bright spot for me though in this offense besides J.K. Dobbins has been Quentin Johnson. He had a rough rookie year last year, but he's been playing really good so far in the 2024 season. Didn't necessarily have the craziest game against the Steelers because like I said, they did lose, but he did have 2 receptions for 44 receiving yards and a touchdown. So if anything, if you're a Chargers fan so far, besides J.K. Dobbins in the rushing game and just Harbaugh changing the identity of the team and Joe Alt being a great rookie offensive lineman so far, Quentin Johnson has to be one of the big happy points if you're a Chargers fan too, because of how he's played this year. Not dropping the ball as much, being able to be a reliable receiver, and also Ladd McConkey had 3 receptions for 44 receiving yards too. So the Chargers, they're gonna surprise a lot of people this year, but for the Steelers, they're looking really nice. And like I said, keep Justin Fields starting. Do the right thing, Mike Tomlin. I know you have Russell Wilson on the bench waiting, but hey, availability is one of the key things you need, and Justin Fields, he's playing good and he can be a future quarterback 1 for your franchise. Now this game between the Seattle Seahawks and the Dolphins, I'm not surprised at all. The Seahawks dominated the Dolphins, winning 24-3, and when you lose Tua Tagovailoa to a concussion, you're playing both of your backup quarterbacks, you know things are going to go astray. Not really too much to talk about from the Dolphins side. I think that they should certainly think about signing a player like Ryan Tannehill, who is a veteran, and we've seen what veterans can do. For instance, we'll talk about later the Panthers and Andy Dalton played. You could see something similar from a Ryan Tannehill bringing him in, so we'll see about that because it's not looking good. But we're going to really focus on the Seattle Seahawks, who are 3-0, still one of the few undefeated teams in the league, and I like what they're doing under Mike McDonald, first-year head coach. Geno Smith had a solid game. He did have a couple of interceptions, but he completed 26 out of his 34 passing attempts for 289 passing yards and a touchdown. Zach Charbonnet has really stepped up in the absence of Kenneth Walker, had 18 carries for 91 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and DK Metcalf has been going absolutely Super Saiyan. Had only 4 receptions, but he had 104 receiving yards and a touchdown. Noah Fant for the Seahawks played really good too, had 60 receiving yards. The Seahawks are definitely looking nice. I like what they're doing. Right now, they're leading the division in the NFC North, which is crazy to say, but we know the injuries from the Rams and for the 49ers, so we'll see what will happen throughout the year, but I like what the Seahawks are doing, and they certainly look like, even if they don't win a division, they could be a fixture in the NFC. Now, with the benching of Bryce Young after week 2, a lot of people had question marks about how the Panthers would look going into week 3, and they looked nice because they really dominated the Las Vegas Raiders, winning 36-22. Andy Dalton was the first quarterback this season to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he specifically had 319 passing yards, completing 26 out of 37 passing attempts for those 3 touchdowns. It's crazy how he looked. Like I talked about the Dolphins a second ago, you want to take a chance on a veteran quarterback like a Tannehill, and you saw what Andy Dalton did, of course, what he did in Cincinnati early in his career, leading him to some playoff games and things of that nature. He looked really good in this game, and I still think that the Panthers are a flawed and disorganized and dysfunctional franchise, and I think a lot of people are fooled because they won this game, and the Raiders probably came in lightly, taking them lightly. But I'll give credit where credit is due. Andy Dalton played a really good game, and Dave Canales, he is a good offensive mind. We saw what he did with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, so it's not like he didn't know how to coach. But Bryce Young, he probably needs his development. It's going to be good for him. I still think that ultimately he needs to get out of Carolina because it's just dysfunction, and how things have went just hasn't been good for him. But the Panthers, they played a really good game, and this could be a jolt for them, but I still think that they're going to be a bad team and still think they're a bad football team. A lot of people saying, oh, they're 1-2 now, they got to win under Andy Dalton, under the red rifle. Let's calm down. But the team looked good. Chuba Hubbard had 21 carries for 114 rushing yards. Deontay Johnson had a huge game, having 8 receptions for 122 receiving yards and a touchdown. Chuba Hubbard also had 55 receiving yards too. And Xavier Legette had 42 receiving yards. So the team played a well-oiled football game overall, offensively and defensively. The Raiders struggled, especially from a quarterback standpoint, after Gardner Minshew had a really good game against the Ravens. He ended up getting benched for Aiden O'Connell at 82 passing yards, and Gardner Minshew had 214 passing yards with a touchdown and interception. So the Raiders definitely have to look at themselves in the mirror for this game. There's no question, I think, that they looked at the Panthers coming in lightly in that game. And also Antonio Pierce, head coach of the Raiders, said that players were taking business decisions instead of playing like a team. They were playing like individuals. So yeah, that's a bad loss for the Raiders, especially after you beat the Ravens in week 2. For the Panthers, hey, you got a dub, man, but I'm not overreacting like some of these people are. Now this game was really good, but it didn't start off that way. The Los Angeles Rams beat the San Francisco 49ers 27-24 on a game-winning field goal. And it's crazy though, because the 49ers, they were up 14-0 at one point. It was looking like the game was going to be a blowout, and we know that the injuries the 49ers have, but that's no excuse to blow a 14-point lead. Brock Purdy, I would say he had a really good game. He completed 22 out of his 30 passing attempts, had 292 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And Juwan Jennings specifically, he went crazy. He had 2 total touchdowns in the 2022 and 2023 seasons. And in this game alone, Jennings had 11 receptions for 175 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. So he went insane in the absence of players like Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and of course still Christian McCaffrey. But one player a lot of people expected to step up but really didn't play that well was Brandon Ayuk. He only had 5 receptions for 48 receiving yards. And ultimately, that's a combination of a lot of things. Less weapons on the field obviously meant more attention for Ayuk, but still, man, I know fantasy owners of Ayuk were probably annoyed, but if you had Juwan Jennings, you're eating good. But it doesn't matter because the 49ers still lost that game, man. I remember the 2020 season after the 49ers lost in the Super Bowl in 2019. They had a down year because obviously it was a COVID year, but they dealt with injuries then too. I'm not saying that this season will be the exact same, but if they continue to deal with the injury bug and things like that, their season is going to look a lot different than people expected in terms of them potentially being back in the Super Bowl or having a deep playoff run. Because if you don't have your best players, you're not going to have your best product on the field and teams are going to pass you up, and that's just facts. But for the Rams, they are dealing with a lot of injuries too. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, a lot of their offensive linemen, but still they were able to step up and come back and win the game. Matthew Stafford had a pretty good game, completed 16 out of his 25 passing attempts, had 221 passing yards and a touchdown. Tyron Williams had 2 touchdowns on 89 rushing yards, had 24 carries, so that was definitely a lot. Tutu Atwell had 93 receiving yards and 4 receptions, stepped up in the absence of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. So that's a good win for the Rams. Speaking of another NFC West team, the Arizona Cardinals lost to the Detroit Lions, losing 20-13. It's a good win for the Lions after being defeated by the Buccaneers in week 2. They were able to play more of their identity in the football game. Jared Goff had way too many passing attempts in the game against the Buccaneers. In this game, it was way more efficient. Completed 18 out of his 23 passing attempts for 199 passing yards, 2 touchdowns and only 1 interception. But my thing, which was what they always should do, is focusing on the running game. David Montgomery had 23 carries and 105 rushing yards in the touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs had 16 carries for 83 rushing yards. And I'm sure y'all saw that hook and ladder play from Amon-Ra St. Brown to Jahmyr Gibbs. That was absolutely filthy. That was a great play. I love that. And Amon-Ra St. Brown himself had 75 receiving yards on 7 receptions and a touchdown. The team looked really good, and I'm hoping that Sam Laporta is okay because he ended up leaving early to an injury. But that team is looking nice. I mentioned the Packers and the Vikings earlier. The Lions won the division last year, so that division in the NFC North is definitely going to be tough. And it's an exciting thing. The NFC North is looking like the AFC North in years past in terms of the parity and the competition in that division, but I like it a lot. And it's a good win for the Detroit Lions. And for the Cardinals, they should still be encouraged because this team is looking really competitive, really good. Last year they were competitive, they weren't great. That's how they were able to get Marvin Harrison Jr. But I like how they're playing. And Marvin Harrison Jr., talking about him, he had 5 receptions on 64 receiving yards and a touchdown. Wasn't as electric as his week 2 game against the Rams, but still solid. And Kyler Murray didn't have as electric game either, but I said still solid. He completed 21 out of his 34 passing attempts, had 207 passing yards, a touchdown, and interception. I think the Cardinals, they will certainly be even more improved than they were last year. And I wouldn't necessarily expect them to make the playoffs this year. I can see them winning like 7 or 8 games this year. But next year, I think that they're going to make the playoffs and continue to be even better. And their defense has surprised a lot of people, but it shouldn't be surprising because Jonathan Gannon, we saw what he did with the Eagles defense in the 2022 year. So a good win for the Lions, but the Cardinals fans, they should be encouraged because they're putting a good quality of football on the field. All right, so there's no other way to say it. Y'all know I'm a Cowboys fan, and this game was absolutely embarrassing, and it pissed me off, to be frank. Yeah, the game got more competitive in the second half, and the Cowboys almost came back, but of course, they almost came back. That's to disappoint because the Ravens won 28-25, and there's a lot of things I can talk about. I'm going to talk about the Ravens, of course, real quick because I might go on a little tangent about the Cowboys, but the Ravens, I mean, they absolutely had their way. Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry combined for over 230 plus rushing yards between the two. Derrick Henry had 25 carries for 151 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Lamar Jackson had a rushing touchdown on 87 rushing yards, also had 182 passing yards. Players like freaking Nelson Aguilar had a 56-yard reception on the Cowboys defense. I mean, they just had their way with the defense, the Dallas Cowboys, and really everyone is. Ravens, they obviously needed this win more because they could have been facing an 0-3 hole if they would have lost against the Cowboys. And they almost did give up the game. I mean, I'm going to acknowledge that for sure. That comes down to execution because we saw in week 2, they were beating the Raiders by 10 points and gave that lead up in the 4th quarter. So that's a concerning thing, I would say, long term for the Ravens, but it's a good sign because we saw how explosive their offense can be. But for the Cowboys, let's just talk about them real quick. First and foremost, I hate to say this because it is the ultimate indictment to professional athletes and things of that nature, but I don't care, man. Cowboys are playing so soft right now. Micah Parsons said it's a prove it week going into this game. Well, y'all proved that y'all can't stop the run. And every single team that the Cowboys play against, as they should, they need to test that run defense, especially that left side. They can't stop a nosebleed on that side. It's just bad. It is bad football. Mike Zimmer, he is a good DC, but he's not out there playing. It comes down to the players. And DeMarcus Lawrence said something about them not needing to play like Little League football players, and after they stop playing like that, they'll be good. Well, that comes down to a pride thing ultimately. I mean, you just don't want it bad enough. I don't know what it is. I do know one thing though, we have to stop blaming Dak Prescott for everything. Yes, the offense was very stagnant, and they are a one-dimensional football team. I mean, when you have a player like Derrick Henry that wanted to come play for the Cowboys, and you didn't even look his way, and Jerry Jones said apparently they couldn't afford him, which is a lie. You're gonna have a trash running game. You're gonna have to be one-dimensional and rely on the passing game. Dak Prescott, he did play a good game in the second half. The first half, like I said, their offense was not good at all. He did complete 20 at his 51 passing attempts, had 379 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. He did good for me on one of my fantasy teams, had 52 points, but it doesn't matter because your team just looks average, like an average football team. My thing is, you might as well look forward to next year. A lot of this team is going to be the same. For me, Micah Parsons, he really gets on my nerves. Like I said, I'm a Cowboys fan, so I'm a little biased in terms of how it feels, but objectively, talks so much. Having that podcast every single week. I mean, there's nothing wrong with players having podcasts, but bro, we don't want to hear about what you're going to do. You have to show what you're going to do on the field. And it's really testing a lot right now. It's just bad. It is bad football. It's hard to watch as a fan. Just see a team get waxed week in and week out, and they play against the Giants on Thursday. They should win that game, but bro, I wouldn't even be surprised if they lost it because it's bad football. But that's my tangent about that. The Ravens, it's a good win for them. They needed it desperately. The Cowboys are now 1-2 as well. Both of these teams are 1-2, so we'll see how their seasons go. The Sunday night football game took place between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Atlanta Falcons, and while the Falcons had a chance to win the game, the Chiefs prevailed, winning 22-17. I know a lot of people are going to say stuff about the refs because it was a pass interference call that went miss the Chiefs had on the Falcons, but they didn't call it. The game could have looked differently. The Falcons could have won that game too if it was called, but it didn't, and the Chiefs still won. But I will say, even though the Falcons lost this game, they had a good win against the Eagles, and they're showing to be a really good football team, and they'll be fixtures in the NFC South. Kirk Cousins had an efficient game, completed 20 out of his 29 passing attempts for 230 passing yards, a touchdown and 1 interception. Drake London had 6 receptions for 67 receiving yards and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney had 8 receptions for 66 receiving yards. But one thing I will say, that freaking Kansas City Chiefs defense, they know how to stop the run, that's for sure. Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier were really non-factors. They combined for 63 rushing yards in total. They just really couldn't get anything going, and we have to give credit to Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City and how they play defense. We saw last year in 2023 when they won the Super Bowl, and just the whole season, that defense really held things down for them. Of course, Patrick Mahomes is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and could be on his way to being the GOAT, but they make life a lot easier for him in the offense, and at times for him being able to manage games. And this game, he had a bad interception, but I still don't overreact to that, especially with this team and the Chiefs, because they have a chance to win 3 consecutive Super Bowls. He completed 26 out of his 39 passing attempts at 217 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. And we do know that they're without Isaiah Pacheco because he was injured in the Week 2 game against the Bengals. But this team, they're still clicking, especially receiving wise. Rashee Rice has certainly emerged to being their wide receiver number 1. Had 12 receptions for 110 receiving yards and a touchdown. Really good for them, especially after how things went last year with the team in drops and unreliable receivers. And Travis Kelce has started off slow, but I think that they'll be able to get him more involved. Juju Smith-Schuster also had a touchdown, so the Chiefs, they're still undefeated, and people are still going to have to come for the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes at some point. But like I said, it's still early in the season. We'll see how things go. It's a good win for the Chiefs, and for the Falcons, they're going to be lit in the NFC South and the NFC. I think so too. Let's get into this Monday Night Football doubleheader, and I'm going to be brief with this Buffalo Bills and Jaguars game because it was clearly a blowout. Really, in the second quarter, the game was over, but there's something that needs to be said. Besides Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen is clearly solidified as the second best quarterback in the league. All of the overrated talk, all the talk about how the Bills were going to be worse this year, things of that nature. Not only is Josh Allen proving the league wrong, but you can make the argument that he should be the MVP favorite right now. And I remember back in 2022, a lot of people viewed that as a potential year for him to win the MVP, and even last year because he statistically went off too. But this year, if they keep up this rate and the Bills continue to be this dominant, there's no question that he's going to win the award. But yes, they smoked the Jacksonville Jaguars by 37 points on Monday night. I mean, the score was 34-3 at halftime, dog. Like, it was over for sure. And I'll talk about the Jaguars a little real quick before I circle back to Josh Allen and the Bills. It just looks bad right now. Just signed Trevor Lawrence to that contract extension in the summer, and I certainly think that he's capable of being a really good quarterback, but he just has these moments where it's like, dang, bro, what's going on? You do not look like a number 1 pick. So I definitely think a lot is on the line with the Jaguars this season. Doug Peterson's seat, it should be hot. I'm not gonna lie. They still haven't won a game yet. They're 1-3 winless teams so far, and 2 of the winless teams, and another one that we're going to talk about later in the Cincinnati Bengals. They're teams that we expected to be in a playoff conversation, so it's definitely definitely alarming for them. But going back to the Bills, they play a physical brand of football, and they've been run dominant for sure, but also Josh Allen was able to distribute the ball well to all of his weapons. Basically a wide receiver by committee approach. Josh Allen completed 23 out of his 30 passing attempts, had 263 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Of course, you know, he had 44 rushing yards on 6 carries. James Cook had a touchdown. Khalil Shakir had 72 receiving yards and a touchdown. Dalton Kincaid had a touchdown. Ty Johnson had a touchdown. Keon Coleman had a touchdown. I'm telling you guys, this team is still going to win the division, and Josh Allen should be the MVP favorite. Like I said, it is early. I will continue to say it's early in the season, but I know one thing though. The Bills have owned the AFC South since 2020, and I think they're going to own it again. The second matchup on Monday Night Football was a game between the Washington Commanders and the Cincinnati Bengals, and it was so good, but the Commanders prevailed, winning 38-33, and Jaden Daniels, he went off. He is looking like that guy from this quarterback class, and it's been a conversation for sure that these quarterbacks have struggled so far. All the rookie quarterbacks that are starting this season, in terms of Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, but Jaden Daniels hadn't played bad in weeks 1 and 2 in my opinion, and in this game, he went crazy. He completed 21 out of his 23 passing attempts, had a 90% completion percentage, had 254 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Also coupled that with 39 rushing yards and a touchdown. So 3 total touchdowns. He just looked so poised in the pocket at the end of the game, connecting with Terry McLaughlin for that last touchdown. That was just really the seal that put the game away. Just looks very comfortable in this offense. Some of the veterans that they brought in offensively and defensively, and Dan Quinn being a former head coach, and bringing in Cliff Kingsbury to call plays too in Washington, it looks good. I certainly think that Jaden Daniels will be an offensive rookie of the year favorite, but you also have to think about players like Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. too, because it goes beyond the quarterback position too on offense. But he's looking really good. And the Commanders, if they can win 7, 8, 9 games, shoot, they could potentially be the second team in NFC East, because we don't know how the Cowboys will be, and the Eagles, I mean, they look solid too, but those teams are unpredictable right now. But the Commanders certainly have some talent, and with Jaden Daniels, they definitely found a future superstar. I play like this every single game, but you certainly see the poise, the talent, the athleticism at his frame. It's a really good sign for Commanders fans to win on the road like that in Cincinnati too. And for the Bengals, you're still winless as well, just like the Jaguars. And I know Joe Burrow, he's cool, calm, and composed usually, but y'all have to have some type of urgency, man. You go to 0-4 next week, we're gonna be having different conversations, because I believe that there hasn't been a team that's been 0-3 in the Super Bowl era to make the playoffs. I think except for the Houston Texans, I could be wrong, like in 2018, but that's not good. This is bad football. They always start off slow. You don't want to start off slow. Yeah, it's good to know that you can climb out of deep holes, but you want to start off fast. And to continue to play like this, I will say Joe Burrow didn't have a bad game. Completed 29 of his 38 passing attempts, had 324 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Connected with Yoshi Vosh, connected with T. Higgins, connected with Jamar Chase. But still, the team overall, they aren't as balanced. The defense was letting Jaden Daniels have his way. It was just tough to watch if you're a Bengals fan. So there's a lot of questions there in Cincinnati, because you expected your team to be at the top of the AFC and in the AFC North, but right now they can't even get a win. But for the Commanders, man, Jaden Daniels, he is that guy. Let me know in the comments down below some of your biggest takeaways, how your team is doing currently, and some of your biggest predictions going into next week in week 4 and just the season overall. I appreciate you guys watching. Always make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at SwaggyRuss, and also on TikTok at SwaggyRuss2 for cooking videos, shorts, reels, things of that nature, all content. Y'all be blessed. Y'all are loved. God loves you. Jesus loves you. You have purpose and you matter. I hope your fall is going well. Almost the end of 2024. It's crazy, but hope your year has went well. And even if it hasn't been the greatest, you're here for a reason, and God has great things in store for you. So y'all have a good one. Y'all be blessed. Love y'all. Y'all have a good one.